The galaxy was wide and dangerous, but even in its darkest corners, heroes sometimes appeared. Captain Elias Vorn was one of them, though he did not wear a medal or carry a title that anyone outside of the human fleet would recognize. In his own way, he carried something far rarer than rank or reputation: instinct. And instinct had brought him to the edge of the Avarian stellar dominion, to a mission no one had dared to accept. The Princess Queen, Serelith, was in trouble. She had been kidnapped during a diplomatic visit to the outer colonies, a journey meant to strengthen ties with human worlds. Instead, she had been taken by the Void Reavers, creatures that thrived on fear and blood, ancient predators who had terrorized civilizations for centuries. They were not merely violent. They were strategic. They knew how to weaken empires by taking the most valuable lives. And now, they had taken hers. The Dominion's fleets were delayed by protocols, treaties, and endless debates. Every minute of hesitation could have been fatal, and for the Princess Queen, it nearly was. It was at that moment that humanity acted in its own quiet way. Elias's ship was a single corvette, small and fast, capable of slipping through enemy patrols unnoticed. It carried no diplomatic insignias, no grand weapons beyond what a small crew could operate. Just one man and a mission. He had received no official orders from Earth's high command. He was not paid for this mission. He had no desire for reward. All he carried was his knowledge, his skill, and a stubborn sense that some things were more important than gold, more important than treaties, more important than life itself. The journey to the Reaver territory was treacherous. Sensors failed under the radiation storms of uncharted systems, and ambushes lay hidden in the debris of destroyed colonies. Elias navigated with patience, relying on instincts honed through years of patrols and survival in the harshest corners of human space. Each maneuver, each jump through hyperspace brought him closer to a fortress that no human had ever dared to enter. When he reached the Reaver stronghold, he did not announce himself. He did not attempt a grand assault. Instead, he observed. Every movement of the enemy ships, every pulse of their energy weapons, every automated defense system was studied and calculated. Where most would have panicked at the sight of a live Reaver dreadnought, Elias found openings, gaps in their patterns that no one had predicted. He waited for the right moment, and then he struck. Inside the fortress, he moved like a shadow. The Reavers were unlike humans. They did not feel fear in the same way. They did not hesitate, but they were predictable, rigid in their strategies. Elias used that against them. He sabotaged power conduits, caused gravity failures, and rerouted automated defenses. The Reaver's own mechanisms turned on them as he moved silently through the labyrinthine corridors. Finally, he reached the chamber where the Princess Queen was held. The air was thick, alien, suffocating in the unnatural way the Reavers designed their spaces. She was chained inside a biological containment unit, monitors and tubes feeding into her body, keeping her alive and weak at the same time. When she saw him, her eyes were a mixture of shock and disbelief. In every story, in every account of rescues, a hero demanded reward, respect, acknowledgement. But Elias said nothing of the sort. He did not bow. He did not speak of treaties or payment. He simply released the restraints and said, "We're leaving." The journey back was perilous. The Reavers noticed the breach quickly, and alarms screamed through the fortress. Elias navigated the chaos, weaving between energy beams and collapsing corridors. The Princess Queen clung to him, her hands gripping his jacket, her mind racing with confusion. He did not ask her to be quiet. Bees did not scold her for fear. He simply kept moving, calculated every turn, every maneuver. When they reached the corvette, the escape sequence was already underway. The ship slipped through narrow openings in the Reaver defenses, weaving through asteroid fields and radiation storms. The Reavers fired relentlessly, but they could not anticipate human improvisation. Elias used the terrain itself as a weapon, sending debris and broken ships tumbling into their path. One by one, The Reaver ships fell, not by superior firepower, but by careful calculation and timing that no alien intelligence could predict. Finally, they jumped into hyperspace. Silence filled the Corvette. The Princess Queen looked at him, trying to understand the man who had risked everything for her without expecting anything in return. Elias only nodded toward the stars. He said nothing more. When they arrived in the Avarian capital, the entire Dominion expected ceremony, celebration, and reward. Delegates and advisors pressed forward, offering gold, ships, even entire star systems. Every human observer from Earth's fleets watched with curiosity. They expected him to accept something, anything, as a measure of gratitude.
Elias refused. He did not take a single star system.
He did not bow before royalty. He did not even accept a simple medal. Instead, he shook his head and said, "No payment needed." The Avarian Dominion did not understand. The Void Reavers, however, understood far too well. And somewhere in the cold depths of uncharted space, something older, something ancient and calculating, took notice of humanity's actions. The Princess Queen did not speak to him then. She only watched as he turned and walked away, moving toward the docking bay where his Corvette awaited. She wondered at the calmness in his stride, the lack of greed, the complete absence of fear in his eyes. She wondered why humans who were often underestimated had a courage and morality no alien empire seemed capable of understanding. The Dominion scrambled to make sense of the situation. In their culture, a life debt was sacred. To save a life was not just an act of mercy. It was an act that demanded reciprocity. A royal life debt was considered eternal. And now, the debt had not been claimed. The human had walked away without acknowledging it. The Princess Queen felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Humanity had acted quickly, decisively, and without expectation. And in doing so, they had left a ripple in the political currents of the galaxy. The Void Reavers were enraged. They were creatures that measured everything in profit and power. The refusal of payment was a challenge they had not expected, one that would not be ignored. In human space, Elias returned to his routine duties, patrolling the edge of known systems, preparing ships, and training new recruits. No one celebrated him. No one honored him. He did not write reports of heroism or glory. He simply reported that the hostage was secured, the situation resolved, and the borders were safe. But the galaxy noticed. Intelligence networks on distant worlds began murmuring about the human who refused payment. Rumors spread through starports and council chambers. A human had saved a princess without asking for anything. A human had acted without thought for reward, without the guidance of empires, treaties, or laws. And the Void Reavers were not silent.
They retaliated. Outposts at the edges of Avarian space were attacked.
Colonies burned. Broadcasts of terror and fear went out across the systems. But for every attack, humans responded. Not for wealth, not for honor, not for politics, but because people were being hurt. The Dominion struggled to keep up. Their fleets were massive but slow. Their politicians were cautious. Humanity, with a fraction of the forces, had shown speed, cunning, and resilience. They struck at Reaver positions not with vengeance, but with precision. The galaxy began to realize a terrifying truth. Humans did not fight for money. Humans fought because they had to. And in the shadow of these events, Princess Queen Saralith understood that her life had been saved, not because of human power, but because of human values. Something older, something immeasurable, stirred in the dark reaches of space. The actions of a single human had set a chain of events into motion that no empire, no army, no treaty could contain. Elias Vorn, without a medal, without recognition, had reminded the galaxy that strength was not measured by wealth or weaponry alone. It was measured by courage, by instinct, by the willingness to act for others, even when there was nothing to gain. As the stars stretched endlessly before him, he prepared for the next patrol, the next danger, the next mission. The galaxy was vast. The threats were real, and somewhere, deep in the unknown, the Reavers were already planning. But Elias did not hesitate. He did not calculate profit or glory. He calculated survival, strategy, and mercy. And that, he knew, was all a human needed to change the course of the stars. The galaxy rarely forgot a human who acted without expectation. When Captain Elias Vorn returned to routine patrols, the ripples of his mission were already reaching far beyond the Avarian stellar dominion. Intelligence networks, councils, and even criminal syndicates whispered about the human who had saved the Princess Queen without asking for gold, land, or honor. To most alien cultures, this was incomprehensible. To the Void Reavers, it was a provocation. They struck first at the outer colonies. Small settlements, lightly defended, were torn apart. Energy storms lit the skies. Panic spread. The broadcasts from the Reavers were brutal and clear. Humans interfere.
Humans will pay! The Dominion's fleets hesitated.
Protocols demanded diplomacy. The High Council debated endlessly over countermeasures, arguing about alliances, treaties, and risks. The colonies burned while they deliberated, but humanity did not hesitate. Within hours, 3 human strike groups moved into the Reaver-controlled sectors. No announcements, no ultimatums, no parades. They crossed into hostile space as if they had every right to do so. They did not demand tribute. They did not send messages of fear or warning. They acted. In the heart of the Dominion, Princess Queen Seralith watched the human fleet mobilize on her holomap. Her advisors and ministers were in chaos.
"They cannot be allowed to do this," one shouted. "We do not control them." Seralith, calm but tense, replied, "They do not need permission."
They act because it is right. That is what terrifies our enemies. She realized then that the human who had saved her had not acted for reward. He had acted out of instinct, out of humanity. That instinct now defined the way her empire would fight alongside humans. Swift, precise, and deadly. Elias himself commanded the largest of the 3 fleets. He had no intention of taking glory or credit. His only focus was minimizing civilian casualties and ending the Reaver threat before they could strike again. Every decision was measured, every risk calculated. His fleet moved like a single organism, each captain trusting him implicitly, even though they had never met him before. The first engagement came at the borders of a mining colony. The Reavers were waiting, their dreadnoughts poised to destroy the settlement. But Elias had anticipated their formation. He directed his ships to split the enemy line, using human tactics the Reavers had never encountered. Unpredictable maneuvers, sudden retreats, and counterattacks in sectors the Reavers thought secure. The Reavers were brutal. Their ships regenerated, their weapons adapted, and their propaganda systems broadcast screams and threats designed to break morale. But humans responded differently. When Reavers tried to spread fear, humans did not panic. They did not shout, plead, or argue. They acted. Every ship, every captain, every pilot followed Elias's lead. By the time the Reavers realized the human fleet had bypassed their traps, it was too late. Mining stations were evacuated. Energy cores of dreadnoughts were sabotaged, supply lines severed. Entire squadrons of Reavers fell without ever knowing who had orchestrated their defeat. Back in the Dominion capital, Seralith received urgent updates. She had never seen warfare like this. Her empire's armies were powerful, disciplined, and organized, but they were slow to adapt. The humans moved like a living storm, adjusting to every Reaver tactic almost before it happened. And yet, at the same time, the humans saved every life they could, prioritizing civilians and colonists. Her advisors muttered about rules of engagement. "They risk everything for nothing," one said. "It defies reason." She only shook her head. "It does not defy reason. It defies our understanding. That is what makes them dangerous." In the field, Elias faced challenges that would have shattered any other commander. Reaver cloaking technology rendered entire squadrons invisible. Their regenerative shields could heal faster than human weapons could destroy. They fought with cunning, striking at supply routes and civilians to force humans into defensive positions. But Elias adapted. Micro-drone swarms were deployed to flush out cloaked ships. Weapon frequencies were altered to penetrate regenerative armor. Human ingenuity and adaptability turned each Reaver tactic against itself. Despite the horrors of battle, Elias remained calm. He did not scream orders. He did not demand obedience through fear. He explained risks, presented options, and trusted his people to make choices in the moment. And they did. The bond between human captains and crews was different from any alien fleet. It was based on understanding, not fear. Trust, not coercion. On one of the reclaimed colonies, Princess Queen Seralith finally saw Elias in action. She had arrived aboard an Avarian fleet to assist in the coordination of human efforts. She watched as he maneuvered his corvette through a collapsing asteroid field, drawing a Reaver dreadnought into collision courses that destroyed its hull without endangering any civilian ships. He did not flinch, even when the bridge shook violently from energy blasts. He did not panic when communications went down. He acted, as always, with precise logic and quiet confidence. She realized something else as she watched him. He did not seek credit. He did not care if anyone recognized the risks he took. Every decision, every sacrifice, was made because it was the right thing to do. After the battle, the Reaver Overmind sent a message directly to the human fleets. Its voice was harsh, synthetic, and filled with rage. Why do you fight without profit? Why do you risk your lives for creatures you do not even know? His message was broadcast to every Reaver sensor in the system. Because you hurt people. The Reavers did not understand. They could not. Every civilization they had conquered had been predictable, calculating. Humans were not predictable. They were not motivated by greed or ambition alone. They were motivated by instinct, by empathy, and by a quiet, unyielding courage that no weapon could destroy. Word of the human fleet's actions spread like fire across the galaxy. Mercenary groups, pirate fleets, and even neutral empires took notice. They began to whisper about the humans, about the captain who refused payment for saving a princess, about the fleets that moved without orders, about the way humans seemed unstoppable despite their relatively small numbers. Within the Avarian Dominion, political tensions grew. Some factions argued that the humans had insulted the Empire by refusing payment. Others feared they had silently claimed influence over the throne. Military strategists debated endlessly about the long-term consequences of human actions, but the Princess Queen saw something deeper. She saw a species whose power came not from domination or greed, but from values. In the midst of this chaos, Elias continued to patrol. He responded to distress calls, sabotaged Reaver operations, and rescued stranded colonists. Each success seemed almost effortless to him, but the Dominion and its allies were astonished. It was not just his skill, it was the human way of thinking. Memes did not merely fight to win. They fought to protect, to save, to act without calculating reward. That made them terrifyingly effective. Meanwhile, the Reavers retreated only slightly, regrouping in the shadows of uncharted space. They were ancient and patient, but they had underestimated one thing. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were capable of acts that no algorithm, no tactical calculation, no empire-wide doctrine could anticipate, and that unpredictability, combined with relentless morality, made them dangerous beyond measure. Princess Queen Seralith spent nights thinking about Elias. She could not understand his choices in the way she understood the political calculations of her empire. She had been trained to negotiate, to reward, to calculate debts, but he had ignored all of it. He had saved her life without a single expectation in return, and that simple refusal had altered the political and military landscape of the galaxy. She realized with both awe and fear that humanity had changed everything. One human, acting on instinct and morality alone, could alter alliances, challenge ancient enemies, and inspire hope in ways that entire fleets could not. Elias had proven that power did not always come from weapons, money, or strategy. It came from the willingness to act for what was right. As the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, the human fleets continued their quiet, relentless work. No speeches were made, no medals were awarded. No territory was claimed. They simply moved, protecting the innocent, striking at those who would harm them, and demonstrating a strength that no one had expected. The Void Reavers would not forget. They would plan, regroup, and strike again. But Elias and humanity had set the precedent. They did not fight for reward. They fought because it was necessary. And that, the galaxy now understood, was a force unlike any other. Princess Queen Sarilith knew that the debt owed to Elias could not be measured in gold or territory. It was larger than that. It was a lesson, a warning, and a promise. Then humans acted for what was right. And when they did, no empire, no matter how ancient or powerful, could ignore them. Elias did not know that he had become more than a hero. He had become a symbol. In the quiet of his Corvette, as he patrolled the border systems, he thought only of the next mission. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of unknown threats, but he would face them, as always, without thought of reward, without hesitation, and with the same instinct that had saved a princess. And somewhere, far beyond known space, the Reavers prepared for their next strike, unaware that humans were already waiting, not for payment, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. The war against the Void Reavers had stretched across systems, but humanity did not tire. While the Avarian fleets debated, delayed, and maneuvered politically, Captain Elias Vorn and his human strike groups moved like a storm no one could anticipate. Every action had purpose. Every maneuver saved lives, disrupted enemy operations, and sent a message that would echo across the stars. Humans acted not for reward, not for glory, but because they must. The Reavers were unlike any enemy humanity had faced before. Their ships were alive in some strange sense, with regenerative hulls and energy fields that could repair almost instantly. Their weapons were designed to terrorize, to break morale as much as destroy targets, and their tactics were cruel. Colonies were attacked at random, supply lines obliterated, and messages of fear were broadcast across every system. Yet humans adapted. When Reaver armor regenerated faster than standard weapons could penetrate, human engineers adjusted frequency modulators, creating weapons tuned precisely to disrupt the healing processes. When Reavers cloaked their ships, humans deployed swarms of microdrones, tiny sensors that revealed the invisible enemy. When propaganda tried to terrify human populations, humans refused to broadcast fear. Silence became their armor. Action became their voice. The first major battle occurred at the Varen Belt, a cluster of mining stations and trade routes that the Reavers used as a staging area. Intelligence suggested a large dreadnought was waiting to ambush human forces, supported by dozens of smaller attack ships. But Elias had anticipated every step. His fleet split into 3 groups, each moving unpredictably, baiting the Reaver forces into traps carefully calculated in the chaos of asteroid fields and gravity anomalies. Explosions lit the belt like a deadly fireworks display. Human ships weaved through collapsing debris, using the environment itself as a weapon. Reaver dreadnoughts attempted to follow, but one by one they collided with asteroids or fell prey to precise coordinated strikes that no alien army could have predicted. Civilian ships were evacuated first, always first. Human lives came before strategy, before victory, before anything else. Throughout the battle, Elias remained calm, his presence a steady anchor for the fleet. He did not shout orders. He did not boast of victories. He moved from one control station to another, assessing risks, giving concise instructions, trusting his captains to act with the same instinct and courage he demanded of himself. And they did. Each human captain acted decisively, improvising when needed, always with the greater purpose in mind: protect life, eliminate threats, and keep moving. In the midst of the chaos, Princess Queen Sarilith observed from an Avarian command ship. She had accompanied the humans to witness their methods firsthand, to understand how a single species could change the balance of power across the galaxy. She watched as Elias drew a Reaver dreadnought into a trap, using a collapsing asteroid field to destroy its regenerative hull without harming a single civilian ship. His calculations were precise, yet his decisions seemed effortless, instinctive, almost impossible to predict. "This is not just skill," she whispered to her aide. "This is instinct. This is what humans do differently." Dieascasco nodded. "They fight for principles, Your Majesty, not for profit, not for honor, just because it is right." And right now it was terrifyingly effective. When the battle ended, the Varen Belt lay in ruins. But every civilian had survived. Human losses were minimal compared to the destruction inflicted upon the Reaver forces. Intelligence reports indicated that several dreadnoughts were completely destroyed, and entire squadrons of Reaver fighters had been neutralized. The Reavers' communication lines were disrupted, their confidence shaken, and their overmind enraged. The next challenge came on the outskirts of Avarian space. The Reavers had regrouped and prepared a massive strike on a populated system that served as a supply hub for both human and Dominion fleets. It was an audacious plan, meant to draw humans into a trap, but Elias had anticipated the move. Instead of meeting the Reaver fleet head-on, he split his forces again. Decoy ships lured enemy squadrons into carefully calculated ambushes, while the main fleet moved silently through hidden wormholes to flank the dreadnoughts. Sensors revealed the Reavers' movements in advance, not through superior technology alone, but through reading patterns, understanding instinct, and exploiting predictability. The humans moved like a single organism, flowing, reacting, and striking with deadly efficiency. The Reavers had faced countless enemies across centuries, but they had never faced humans. They had never fought a species whose power did not come from sheer numbers or technology alone, but from morality, instinct, and relentless adaptability. Every strike was unpredictable. Every sacrifice was strategic, not for profit, but for protection. And the Reavers could not comprehend it. During one engagement, a Reaver dreadnought cornered several human ships near a collapsing gas giant. The gravity alone could have destroyed them. Most alien commanders would have panicked, surrendered, or retreated. Elias, however, saw opportunity. He ordered the ships to create a precise formation, using gravitational waves to accelerate debris toward the dreadnought. In moments, the massive ship was torn apart without harming a single human vessel. Princess Queen Sarilith watched in awe. Her empire's military had the same technology, the same ships, the same firepower, but they lacked the instinct. They had not considered using natural phenomena as weapons. They had not considered minimizing casualties while maximizing effect. Humanity did both simultaneously, instinctively, morally, without hesitation. The Reavers responded with desperation. They launched psychic broadcasts designed to terrify humans, sending visions of death, horror, and despair into the minds of anyone within range. But humans reacted differently. Instead of fear, they focused. They ignored the broadcasts. They acted. The result was disorienting for the Reavers. Every attack intended to break morale instead strengthened resolve. Every Reaver plan collapsed under the silent, relentless logic of human instinct. After the battle, the Reaver Overmind sent another message. Its voice, synthetic and harsh, carried across the void. Why do you fight without gain? What drives you? You will lose. Elias's response was broadcast clearly to every Reaver sensor. Because you hurt people. No treaties, no negotiation, no payment, just truth. And that truth was devastating to the Reavers. Their entire understanding of conquest, domination, and fear had been shattered by a species that valued action over reward. The Princess Queen realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not in ships or weapons. It was in values, their instinct to protect life, Their unwillingness to seek reward and their moral clarity made them unpredictable and unstoppable. Entire fleets could be destroyed, but humanity's principles remained intact, guiding every decision, every action, every sacrifice. The war reached its peak when a Reaver command fleet attempted to retreat into a hidden sector. Intelligence suggested they planned to regroup and strike at multiple human and Dominion worlds simultaneously. Most empires would have panicked. They would have called for councils, sent ambassadors, or delayed action. Elias, however, saw opportunity. He led his fleet through uncharted wormholes, following patterns only humans could predict, and struck the Reavers before they could regroup. Entire squadrons were neutralized. Supply lines were severed. Command ships were destroyed. The Reavers retreated, wounded and confused, into the depths of uncharted space, never to regroup in the same strength again. Princess Queen Serylith watched the aftermath with a mixture of awe and unease. The humans had done more than save colonies or defeat fleets. They had altered the balance of power across the galaxy. They had shown that instinct, morality, and courage were as lethal as any weapon. The galaxy would never see war the same way again. Elias returned to patrols once more. He did not seek recognition. He did not celebrate victory. He simply prepared for the next threat, quietly and methodically. He had no empire to answer to, no title to claim, no medal to display, and that was what made him dangerous. No ambition clouded his judgment. No desire for reward limited his actions. He acted because it was right. Somewhere, deep in uncharted space, the remnants of the Void Reavers observed. They realized that their understanding of power, fear, and control had been shattered. They could adapt their ships, regenerate their armor, and rearm their fleets, but they could not comprehend the principle that drove humans. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake had cost them everything. The Princess Queen reflected on what she had witnessed. Her empire had powerful fleets and ancient traditions, yet humans had reshaped the outcome of the war with a single principle: protect life, act decisively, and expect nothing in return. She realized that this principle, so simple yet so profound, was now the cornerstone of a potential alliance far stronger than any treaty. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, word spread of Captain Elias Vorn, not as a conqueror, not as a soldier of fortune, not as a hero who demanded reward, but as a human who acted because it was right, whose instinct and morality had defeated an ancient enemy, and whose actions reminded every civilization that true strength lay not in power, but in values. The Reavers had lost. The galaxy had watched, and humanity had proven beyond question that their way of life, quiet, moral, instinct-driven, was something no enemy could predict, no empire could control, and no power could withstand. Princess Queen Serylith knew that the debt owed to Elias could never be measured in gold, in treaties, or in territory. It was a lesson, a warning, and a promise. Humans did not fight for payment. They fought because it was necessary, and that necessity was more dangerous than any weapon. As Elias prepared for the next mission, unaware of the legends forming in his wake, the galaxy waited, watching, and learning that the human way was unstoppable, not because of technology, not because of numbers, but because of the courage, instinct, and morality that guided every action. The war against the Void Reavers had ended, but the galaxy was far from quiet. Entire systems had been devastated, fleets had been destroyed, and civilizations had seen horrors that would be remembered for generations. Yet amidst the chaos, humanity stood apart, not as conquerors, not as mercenaries, but as guardians. Their victories were not about territory, wealth, or power. They were about life. Captain Elias Vorn returned to human space after the final battles. There were no celebrations, no parades, no medals waiting for him. He filed routine reports, repaired his ship, and prepared for patrols along the borders of known systems. Yet the galaxy had already taken notice. The story of a human who had saved the Princess Queen of the Avarian Stellar Dominion without expecting any reward, had spread across star systems through councils, empires, and networks of spies. The Princess Queen, Seralaith, had watched humanity's victories firsthand. She had witnessed Elias in battle, seen his decisions, and marveled at the instinct, calm, and morality that guided him. Her empire owed him a debt greater than any gold, any fleet, or any law could repay. In Avarian culture, life debts were sacred, eternal, and binding. She could demand his hand in alliance, claim control over human fleets, or demand entire systems as repayment. Yet when she considered Elias, she realized that no debt could truly measure his worth. He had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was right. And that refusal to accept anything had changed the course of the galaxy. The formal audience was arranged in the grand hall of the Avarian capital. Delegates from dozens of species filled the chamber. Ambassadors whispered anxiously. Some expected humans to demand tribute, to enforce treaties, to assert control over the Dominion. Others feared the human might make a silent claim to the throne. Every eye turned to the plain corvette that had brought Elias into the system, and then to the unassuming man who emerged from it.
Elias walked into the hall quietly.
He wore no ceremonial uniform, no insignia of command beyond what he had earned in countless patrols. He did not bow. He did not speak to impress. His presence alone commanded attention. The chamber fell silent, waiting for him to state a demand, to claim what was owed. Princess Queen Seralaith stepped forward. Her eyes met his, steady and thoughtful. "Captain Vorn," she said, her voice carrying across the hall, "you have saved my life and protected my empire from destruction. By law, you are owed anything you request. Anything." Elias paused. He looked at her, at the assembled delegates, at the species who had come to witness this moment, and then shook his head. "I want nothing," he said simply. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Delegates whispered to one another. Some stared in disbelief. How could someone save a life and an empire and ask for nothing? In every known culture, heroes expected reward, recognition, or repayment. Humans were different. Seralaith did not flinch. Instead, she pressed further. "You saved me."
You risked your life. You risked the lives of countless humans in your fleet.
"What is it that you truly ask for, if not reward?" Elias's expression was calm, his voice steady. "I ask that your borders remain open to those in need. Any species, any colony, any refugee. Do not close your doors. Protect the vulnerable." The room fell silent. Delegates stared, some in awe, some in confusion. The Queen herself felt a chill of understanding. He had not acted for wealth, for influence, or for power. He acted for principle, and his principle now demanded not tribute, but mercy, protection, and compassion extended across empires. Seralaith realized the magnitude of what he was asking. It was not a command. It was a moral imperative. By granting his request, she would set a precedent stronger than any treaty. Entire systems would learn that the human way was to act for others, not for gain. It would reshape the galaxy. She nodded, her voice firm. "So it shall be. The borders of the Dominion will remain open to all who seek refuge. No exceptions. Your request is honored." The chamber erupted into whispers, some awed, some confused, some inspired. Humans had acted not out of self-interest, but out of instinct, morality, and courage. And now, those actions were codified across the Dominion, an empire that had once relied on rigid protocol and strict hierarchy. Outside, across the galaxy, news of the agreement spread rapidly. Other empires, observing the human example, began reconsidering their policies. Trade corridors opened for refugees. Blockades were lifted. Aid was extended to colonies under threat. What had begun as the actions of a single man had evolved into a galaxy-wide shift in values. The Void Reavers, far beyond the borders of human and Dominion space, realized the full weight of their failure. They had underestimated a species that acted without expectation, that fought with instinct and morality. Their strategies had collapsed. Their fleets had been destroyed or scattered. And now the galaxy knew that humans did not fight for payment. They fought because it was right. Elias returned to his corvette, once again preparing for patrols. There were no celebrations. There were no parades. His life was quiet, disciplined, and purposeful. But across systems, fleets, colonies, and empires, the impact of his actions endured. Stories of his courage, intelligence, and morality spread, inspiring new generations to act for what was right rather than for what was profitable. Princess Queen Seralith observed him from her command chamber, understanding that she had witnessed something unique. Elias Forn was not merely a soldier or a hero. He was a symbol of a species that defined strength not by weapons or territory, but by instinct, morality, and the willingness to act for others. In the weeks following the victory, the Dominion implemented the principles Elias had requested. Borders were opened to refugees, medical aid was extended to colonies previously abandoned, and trade agreements included protections for the vulnerable. Humanity's values had reshaped the political and moral landscape of an entire empire, and the effects were only beginning to ripple outward. Meanwhile, Elias continued his patrols. He saved stranded vessels, assisted in disaster relief, and intercepted rogue Reaver remnants, always quietly, always without expectation of reward. In every action, he reminded the galaxy of what humanity represented: courage without greed, action without self-interest, and protection without hesitation. The Void Reavers, aware now that they could not understand humans of space, they regrouped, but the memory of the battles and the understanding that humans would act for life itself haunted them. They could adapt technology, regenerate ships, and study tactics, but they could not predict the instinct and morality that guided human action. That, the galaxy realized, made humans unstoppable. Princess Queen Seralith began to meet with human leaders more frequently. She sought guidance not on warfare, but on values, principles, and governance. She wanted her empire to reflect the lessons she had learned from humans. She wanted her people to understand that true power lay not in domination, but in protection, in action, and in morality. And in quiet moments, she thought of Elias Forn. He would never know the full measure of his influence. He would never see the stories he inspired or the empires he changed. He had acted because it was right, and in doing so, he had altered the course of the galaxy. Other species began to study humanity more closely. They realized that humans did not fight for glory. They did not conquer for wealth. They did not negotiate for personal advantage. They acted instinctively, morally, and courageously. And as civilizations observed these traits, they began to reconsider their own approaches to power, war, and diplomacy. Elias's legend grew quietly, not through speeches or monuments, but through actions. Colonies remembered him as the human who saved lives without asking for payment. Scientists spoke of his fleet's ingenuity and adaptability. Political leaders feared the unpredictability of humans who acted for principle.
But devil as bad as anyone.
And the Princess Queen knew that the galaxy would never be the same. One evening, as Elias prepared for another patrol, he received a message from the Princess Queen herself. She did not command him. She did not demand a report. She simply thanked him. "Because of you," she wrote, "my empire will choose life over fear. My people will learn that courage is greater than wealth, and morality stronger than power. You have given us more than you will ever know."
Elias smiled faintly. He did not respond with words of pride or arrogance.
He simply continued his preparations. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of unknown threats, and he would face them as he always had, without expectation, without hesitation, and with instinct and courage guiding every decision. In every corner of the galaxy, the story of humanity spread, not as conquerors, not as rulers, not as mercenaries, but as a species that acted because it was right, that fought to protect, that valued life above all else. The Void Reavers learned a lesson they could not forget. The Dominion learned a lesson that reshaped an empire. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, began to see that strength was not measured by wealth, territory, or weapons, but by values, courage, and the instinct to protect what is right. Elias Vorn, unaware of the full weight of his legacy, continued his patrols quietly. He was a human, a captain, and a guardian. He had refused reward, refused glory, and refused power. And in doing so, he had done something far greater. He had changed the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly before him, vast and unknown. Threats waited in shadowed corners. Danger lurked in unexplored regions. And somewhere, in distant voids, remnants of the Reavers plotted their return. But humans had learned a lesson older than any empire. They acted not for gain, but because it was right. And that principle, simple and powerful, made them unstoppable.